Hello and welcome. My name is Father William Maestri, and this is Overfed and Undernourished. I would like to begin by saying that this particular program was not planned for today. We had planned on having the beginning of a new 10-part series on religious liberty. However, events, I believe, have called for a response on the part of this particular program and those of you who watch. It seems that in recent months, the world, and America in particular, have been hopping from crisis to crisis. There was, of course, the corona crisis, the virus that engulfed the world and still is with us. We also had the crisis of the economic meltdown due to the corona crisis, especially here in the United States, for example. Over 40 million Americans are now unemployed. Many businesses are closed and have prospects of not reopening. Tremendous amount of pain and suffering spiritually and psychologically and emotionally, especially within families. And now we find ourselves with another crisis, a pressing one right here within the United States itself. Of course, it is the civil unrest that has become evident in many of our major cities across the United States. And this crisis is a serious one, and it really deserves a word, I think, from our own particular presentations, and hopefully they will be of some value to you in your own thinking and hopefully in your own prayers. It seems to me that we can look back in history, very far back in history. I'm suggesting the time of the Israelites in the Sinai experience under the leadership of Moses. And after the Ten Commandments were presented to the Israelites, as they were about to enter the Promised Land, Moses said to the people, "I place before you a choice. One path leads to death, and the other path leads to life. But the choice is yours as to which you choose to follow. The path of death is driven by idolatry, the worshiping of false gods. The other way is to walk in the way of the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, who brought you out of bondage and slavery, and has given you the law and the statutes by which you are to live and take possession of the land that I will give you." It seems to me that the United States finds itself in Sinai at this very moment. There are two paths before us. One path leads to death, darkness, destruction, despair, despondency. And the other path leads to life and to hope, to reconciliation, and to moving forward to a better future. There are those, unfortunately, who counsel the way of death. It is the way of anger and hatred. It is the way that is covered by darkness. It offers the illusion that there are quick fixes with no potholes. There are no struggles left to be fought. The answers are easy. The path is simple. It offers really no construction, but only destruction. It is found with the ammunition of hatred and resentment. It's found with Molotov cocktails, burning and destroying. It's found with civil unrest. And we ought to remember the words of St. Ambrose. No one is ever healed by hurting another. The very people who are hurt are the very people who can least afford to be hurt. This is not a time for ideology or politics or some kind of other agenda. It's the time for healing. It's the time for a critical and truthful examination of the very society and the relationships that we have, and the way in which we can live in what Lincoln called that more perfect union of justice and peace, of order, respect for the law, equally applied to all citizens. That is not the way that often is being advocated today and is leading to a great deal of our unrest and our lack of peace, to destruction. The way of life requires a great deal of courage. Because if we are honest with ourselves, it takes a great deal more courage to seek the long twilight struggle of courage based upon true justice, true respect for all human life, the natural rights that God has given us. That is the long twilight struggle, and that will continue to be the struggle of humanity until the Lord comes again. We try to build that more perfect union, that more just society, that more peaceable kingdom in which we can live as brothers and sisters, one to the other, as the family, not only of humanity, but as God's family. Those ways are before us at this very moment, this time of testing, this trial in which we find ourselves, in which all of us stand in the dock to give testimony by the way in which we live and what we say and how we speak. And so all of those things are very important, and they fall heavily upon leaders, spiritual leaders, religious leaders, political leaders, leaders who influence public opinion. Those things are very important and should be weighed very heavily whenever we speak or act. Now, what practically can we do? What ought we to be about? Because all of this is all fine and good, but to many it seems to be rhetoric. Well, I would suggest that the first and most important thing we do is that we travel the way of life, not the way of death, with heads bowed on our knees. In other words, the way of prayer. Now, to many, immediately that's dismissed. Prayer is useless, it's not practical, it doesn't work. It's just words into the void. I believe that there are more things done for the betterment of humanity by those who are on their knees with heads bowed than we will ever know. Heaven knows we do not have possession of that kind of knowledge. However, what I do know is this, that the first Christians in the catacombs and those who were locked up, ready to be thrown to the lions in the Colosseum, they prayed. I do know that those on boats from Africa to America, slave ships, they prayed and they sang. Those in slave quarters in America, they prayed. I know that those who struggled against against the abuse of human rights in these civil rights and in the war era of the 50s and 60s and even into the 70s, they prayed and were often led by religious leaders, one of which was Dr. Martin Luther King, who was a minister, by the way, deeply trained in the theology of St. Augustine and in biblical scripture, especially St. Paul. And I know that there were countless witnesses in the concentration camps of Buchenwald and Dachau and Auschwitz. And I believe that there are countless people today with heads bowed and knees bent at this very moment of testing and this very moment of challenge, who are on their knees praying for a higher wisdom and a better way forward. There are those who say, well, what do we do? Keep telling me, well, what do we do? Well, praying is the first thing to do. Secondly, we hear a great deal of talk today about the need for structural change, structural reformulation of our society. We need systemic change. Now, if the truth be told, most of us are concerned about that, and justly so. That needs to be critically examined. At the same time, we have to be honest and say that many of us have very little influence in that area. We're not politicians. We're not shakers and movers. We do not pull the levers in police and those entrusted with public order. We don't have that. But also there is something that I know. I know each and every one of us has the influence over our own selves. What we say, what we do, how we interact daily. The structural change within ourselves, within our own hearts, within our own minds, within our own attitudes and values that we transmit to others, especially to children and to young people coming up. And there are those who may say, well, look, that's all fine and good, but that's not getting the job done, because what can one little person do? Well, you don't have to be a historian, but just have a brief of some familiarity with history to see how much of progress and life and justice and respect took place because one single individual decided to stand up, to refuse in the name of a higher law, who spoke for human dignity, who thought in a new way, who dared to go in a different path of living that brought progress and mutual respect and mutual relationships that often evade us today. It is unfortunate to demean the reality and the importance of one person's witness. That is crucial. And we ought not to feel so powerless to believe that that little patch of earth that God has given to us to trod and to plow and to cultivate, that is not an important part of a larger mosaic. And that larger mosaic is the development and the future development of handing on a better world than the one in which we inherited to those who come after us. And the third and final point that I would like to make has to do with the media. The media is enormously powerful today. We live in a world of enormous technology. We can watch something thousands of miles away in an instant. It's before us, it's in front of us. The pictures that are shown, the words that are associated with it, all of that influences our consciousness and our conscience in terms of the way we act. I'm certainly in no position to dare tell media how they are to judiciously and prudently present programs. But certainly the challenge is there. 24/7, 365 days a year, and in a leap year, 366, where these images are constantly before us. Images of violence, images of destruction, images of death. They infiltrate our consciousness, and they also can numb our conscience as to right and wrong, good and evil. With great power comes great responsibility, and the great need for us to carefully and judiciously and respectfully use that power that we have in our own hands and determine what are the effects, not only short-term, higher ratings, more revenue, more viewers, all of these sorts of things, important as they may be, but they certainly pale in comparison to the importance of making us a better people, a better society, and a better world. That should be assignment number one for all of those who certainly are so influential in our media-driven world today. And so, it seems to me at the end of the day, the trial is really a trial about how we reverence the sacredness of all human life, from conception to natural death, the dignity of each and every single human being made in the image and likeness of God. That's really our test at this moment in history. How we reverence life. Are we going to go the way of death? Are we going to contribute to the culture of death, which is so much around us and with us, becomes part of the everyday cultural furniture? Or are we going to lend our voices and this span of life that we have to build a civilization of life and love? That's the test. That's the trial. That is by which we will be judged in this time of our own testing. There are those who will have the courage, those who will have heads bowed, knees bent, who will seek to walk on the sun side of the mountain. The sun side of the mountain is the mountain where hope wins over despair. Love drives out all fear. And we choose to be that light which shines in the darkness and is never, ever overcome.